Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Hahn, and this is episode 35 of Guided Self-Healing, Fearless Living. And this is our continuation of sharing about our book that we finished last week called The 1 Hour Miracle, which is available right now for pre-order. And if you are hearing this and you love our work, what you could do, if this is before March 15th, is you can pre-order the book. If it's after March 15th of 2022, you can post-order the book. But if you pre-order it, it really helps us, I've been told, because it gets us more reviews from larger review organizations, and it gets us higher order interviews. So it would be wonderful if you want to buy the book to do it sooner than later. And having said that, what we're going to do, we've talked about the forwards that wonderful people have written for us, and we've talked about the introduction. So we're now moving into the first chapter of the book, and the first chapter of the book is called The Evolution of Life and the Creation Myth. And really, the tagline for this is that we long for union, and life, or the divine, longs for love. Now, again, we've gone over some of these concepts in our earlier podcasts, but now we're doing it in the context of the book itself. And the way to begin to understand what we're talking about here, this whole worldview, starts with an invitation into a mystical concept. And the mystical concept really can best be described by the holographic nature of cells in relationship to the body and to consciousness itself. So if we start with ourselves and our cells, we have about 3 trillion of them, and give or take. And the interesting concept, of course, is that every cell on the surface is different, like we are, or like snowflakes are. You'll never find 2 of us that are the same. Even identical twins are not the same, clearly, at least on the surface. And yet underneath it, the idea is that, of course, we're all the same. And so what we want to think about then is that from that point of view, each cell is unique on the surface, but each cell has to hold the whole. And the way we know that is you could take one cell and all the information you need to create a blueprint of the whole universe of that cell is embedded in that cell. It's how Dolly, a sheep in 1996, essentially was created from one cell of another sheep, except, of course, then it would be kind of on one level an exact copy, except for the fact, of course, that that sheep would then start having different experiences and would evolve in a slightly different way. So this is all very interesting. So we want to think that just as each of our trillions of cells are part of us, and yet each of those cells, each of them holds all of us. So every cell is unique. Every cell holds the whole. Each cell holds the whole. So when you're in relationship with another cell on the surface, you're in relationship with something else, but on a deeper level, of course, you're in relationship with yourself. And all of them, every cell is in relationship to the whole body, and every cell also contains the whole body and all the information of the body within it. And the idea here is, the mystical concept is, we are to life as our cells are to our bodies. So each of us is differentiated, and each of us brings our own challenges and gifts. On the other hand, on a deeper level, each of us is all of life, and everyone on the surface that we come into interaction with is different from us and differentiated, but on a whole level is all of life. And every one of us is in relationship with life, but when we're in relationship with each other, we're really on a deeper level in relationship with ourselves and with all of life. And if you get that, that's the whole foundation of what we're doing. And it's why we say that there is a deeper meaning. And so we have to hold these two different aspects of our beingness at once. We have to hold the particular and we have to hold the universal. And this is the trickiest thing on some levels to really get when you are doing your healing work or when you're facilitating somebody else in their healing work, right? So then the notion then is, of course, that just as we are evolving beings and infinite and limited, life is an evolving being that is also infinite and limited. What does that mean, that we're infinite and limited? Well, if we look at ourselves, and we're adults now, let's say, well, when we're a child, of course, on one level, we're the same being as that child was, right? There's a continuity to that. And if we look at me, I am about to turn 65, and on one level, I am the same person I was as an 8-year-old Andy Hahn. But on a whole other level, hopefully I've evolved a little bit since then. So both are true. On one level, I was equally infinite at age 8 as I am at age 65. And on a whole other level, I've evolved, hopefully, in these past, in that case, 57 years, right? So, and the idea that life is the same as us. It's an evolving, living being, just as we are. And so, of course, life is also infinite and life is also limited. And it continues to evolve. And it also, just as we do, it evolves through experiences. And the experiences life have is called all of life, all of the parts of life that life has created, right? So the way life evolves is through experience, just like we do. And so it's like, and as cells and infinite of life, we also evolve, so the cells evolve, and that's the nature of life. So the only question for us, just as it is for ourselves, you could say, but the only question for us is, how aware are we as being part of this process? And if we're totally unaware, then of course, life is a life of fate, because nothing makes any sense and you're just, stuck in unawareness. But the second we become more aware, which is what free will is from my point of view, instead of going kicking and screaming because we say we're fated, we are co-creators of the living destiny of life itself. And so that everything we do is in the context of that evolution, that we are part of that evolution, which of course gives meaning to everything we do. And both of those things are simultaneously true. So on the one hand, when we're really, really aligned with the particular, we are just victims of fate. And when we're truly aligned with the universal, we are co-creators of destiny. And that's really quite an idea. Now, when we're doing our work with people, it becomes really important to hold both of these things simultaneously. Because on the personal level, as people who just are suffering, right, because bad things happen to us that we can't handle, the only response is a humane human response. If something horrific happens to you and I do anything other than just saying, oh my gosh, it's so understandable that you'd be in so much pain because of whatever happened. Anything else would be inhuman and inhumane. But if that's all that we ever did, we would always experience ourselves as victims of fate. We would never move away from victimhood. So in order to get to a different place where we're not victims, but we are, in a sense, avatars or creators, we have to also own a soul level. And in a soul level, you can only ask one question, which is, how is whatever it is that we're experiencing serving the evolution of life itself and our own evolution? And from that point of view, every experience we have is a movement, an evolutionary movement towards being who we truly are, which is remembering who we truly are, which is the evolution of life itself. And so this is all, really quite something. What are we moving towards? We're moving towards self-aware unity consciousness. That's what we're moving towards, because when we do that, we could just say yes to everything, including all the changes that wish to happen, if we just can say, I can accept what is ever happening. Now, accepting whatever is happening does not mean we're not discerning. Accepting means we're not judgmental. We're not comparative. We're not compulsively needing to understand. We're not saying, why hast thou done this to me, right? How could you have done this, right? No, we don't need to, because we already know. We know on some level why this is happening, because in some level it's in service to life. We just may not have enough perspective to understand how yet. And so, of course, then we search for this higher or deeper meaning about how it's in service to something, when on one level it just looks horrendous. And of course, we find out it's in service to something when we're in a different relationship with whatever thing it is that we couldn't handle, and we come into relationship with it, and suddenly worlds open up about what we're trying to heal, how we are in service to life. All these things become more possible for us. So we have to hold these two levels simultaneously. One is the human level of our differentiated self. And the only way to do that is to say, can we be with each other with compassion? Compassion being, I can be with you in your suffering, like the passion of Christ is called the suffering of Christ. So passion really on its deepest level is to say, I can be with you with everything. So of course I'm fully alive. That's what passion is. And so what is the movement of life? It's the movement from being judgmental and experiencing ourselves as limited to being discerning and wise and all open-hearted and open-minded and engaged with life. And the realization, the revelation that who we are is everything, and everything is who we are. And so, of course, we move from a worldview of good and evil, which is a valid but incomplete worldview, to a worldview that who we are is everything. So take your worst, villain and your greatest exemplar, for some of us, perhaps Hitler and Jesus, and we'd say, well, on one level, we're both. Or from a whole other level, from our personal levels, we are the viruses and the bacteria that can kill us, and we're also, if we took the bacteria, we are the antibiotics. And so, of course, then you'd have to say something very strange, which is we'd have to honor all the things that we believe on a limited level are destroying us, because we know even they serve life. And we, of course, destroy them. But we don't do it from a place of war or battle or overcoming. We have to do it from a place of love, that it's um, it's a good day to die, and it's a good day to kill. And of course, we do that. And, my partner in writing the book was a great teacher around saying, that she could love even those aspects of life that were most destructive to her. And that was a great gift to me. Because in my world, she's an exemplar of that kind of love and courage and grace. So she was an inspiration for me to aspire to this. So I'm grateful for that. So really, what we're aspiring to is to love our neighbor as ourselves. Why? Because our neighbor is ourself, right? So if we hate our neighbor, we're hating ourselves. If we judge our neighbor, we're judging ourselves. If we compare ourselves to our neighbor, we're comparing ourselves to ourselves, until we finally realize that there is no denigration, there is no idealization from a deeper aspect of being. There's just revelation. That's all there is. Okay, so what is life then? It's an invitation to remember who we truly are. And when that happens, we move from judgmentalism to discernment. Right? We move from craving to a longing to be who we are. We move from fear to wisdom. Now, why does all this happen? Well, in order to understand that, you have to have a creation myth, right? And I could talk to you about Adam and Eve, which is a very interesting creation myth, but I'm going to give you a different creation myth, which is life is going along, right? And we know some things about life or the divine. And what we know is, it's very interesting. There are two words that describe the infinite aspects of life. It's called omnipotence and omniscience. So, what's omnipotence? It says life is all powerful, or the divine is all powerful. What's omniscience? It means life is all knowing. But it's very interesting. There is no equivalent word for all loving. So, how could that be? And the answer, of course, comes in the aphorism, when two or more are gathered, there is love. Or to put it differently, if you're everything, the one thing you can't experience is relationship. You can't experience love. You can know love exists, you can create something, but you can't experience it until there's two, because love requires something that brings us towards each other. But in order to do that, we have to be separate first, or at least we have to believe we are. It's actually not true, but we have to have that belief. And then we have to say we can love that which is different from ourselves. And then we find ultimately, of course, that it isn't different from ourselves, but we get to experience the surface of it and the wondrousness of the differences that we have. And as long as we ultimately know there isn't those differences, we can truly love, right? So this is what life does. In our creation myth, life is going along and it says, I can know love exists and I can create possibility for love, but I can't experience love until I've created something that is separate. So of course, life does that. It creates something, right? Called the five faces of the divine. It creates something and it sustains it. It has to destroy it also, because it has to be limited, the thing that is created. This is the story of the Garden of Eden, but we're not going to that creation myth, even though I would kind of like to, but some other day. And then the fourth phase is called the mystery. Life gets us to forget who we are. And then the fifth phase, of course, is called grace or revelation, when life invites us to realize who we truly are, which is life in a particular aspect of the infinite. And that's what life is about, is that movement, so that we can have the experience of love while simultaneously knowing that we're loving something that is separate and different from ourselves, but is also exactly the same as ourselves and no different at all. To have both of those experiences simultaneously, right? So, what does life do? As an act of love, life creates something. So, it creates the possibility of more love. And every time we learn to love, which means that we can just be with something and say yes, we create more life. And that, I think, is the point, that when we can truly love, to say, I am you, and I can love you even though we're different on the surface, we actually give life a new experience. And then life's evolving just like we are. And we are the vehicle through which life can do that. And so I will end you with this idea, which is, what is life really about for us? And it's about the movement from identifying with ourselves, right? The identity being what we might call egocentricity, that I am Andy, and that I identify with that. The movement from egocentricity to life centricity. And if you think about it, all of life for us has been about that movement from egocentricity to life centricity, right? So you look at any aspect of your life you like. I mean, we used to think that the world revolved around us, literally, in physics, but then we say, no, the world isn't revolving around us. We're small, and we're revolving around something else. Right? We find that out. It's a desecration of something, right? But it's a truth. Or when we're little kids, we think everything revolves around us. We take everything personally. We say everything is about us. And we begin to realize that nothing is personal and nothing is about us. The things people do to us aren't about us. They're about them. And if they hate us, that's about them. If they love us, that's about them. It's not, the world doesn't revolve around us, right? And Darwin says the same thing, it says like we're just part of a much bigger process, and we're all evolving around it and revolving around it. So And then we, of course, have the exemplar of that in our culture. The movement from why hast thou forsaken me as an exemplar, totally egocentric. I did everything you wanted. Why are you doing this to me? To into your hands I commend my spirit because I know who I truly am. So healing, which is about becoming whole, is about remembering who we truly are so we become integrated. And integrative means that we know union, we know the one, which brings us back to where we started, full circle. We long for union. And as we create more union and we know who we are, we give the divine and we give life what it longs for, which is more love. So, who knew that a book that was originally about a self help book for trauma was really a whole way of understanding the evolution of life itself as a living being that we're in relationship with? And we have so much to participate in. So, my dear friends, this has been a joy sharing this with you. And having said that, we're going to take all of this stuff and now we're going to apply it in our next podcast. We're going to apply it to how we do healing work. And we're going to give you a whole worldview, because what happens now that we have a worldview about life itself, now we can go and start to say, how does that play out when we're trying to understand healing, and particularly healing trauma or healing anything that's blocking us? Because, of course, this whole book is just about how you release blocks so that ultimately you can be who you are, living a life of passion and destiny and mastery and evolution and maturing and opening to this realization that everyone we're in relationship with is important until we ultimately know, most fundamental know, that we are all of them and all of us. So until our next meeting, we will go on to chapter 2. I wish you well, and thank you so much for sharing this with me. And again, you can always reach out to me at ahahn, AHAHN, at lifecenteredtherapy.com. I so appreciate, because people do, the questions and the reflections, and some people saying, really, which I really like skeptics, because they make me think more. And and again, if you ever want to do a session with me, if you have a willingness to be on the podcast, I will do a Zoom session with you. You can be any place in the universe, and we can do that, assuming that Zoom will go that far, which it may not, but we can. And so I'll do sessions with you, and of course I'll answer all your questions as best I can, and certainly we can have a wonderful conversation and learn together, which is the whole point. It's the whole point, because we look for community. We have to be ourselves. There's this wonderful relationship between, differentiation and communion. So we each bring our gifts in the service of more love. So, my dear friends, until we meet again, goodbye.